I just wanted to point this out. This, at Starbucks today, I got dragon drink. Very appropriate, dragon fruit. Since I'm a dragon, so the dragon of light, that's my Dharma name, so it was pretty worth it, I would say. But actually, the dragon being, such an ambivalent symbol in civilization, positive in the East, more negative in the West, that's part of what we want to talk about today, actually. Remember a few weeks ago we saw Huineng in the 23rd koan of the Mamon Khan being pursued by the general. He had been given the insignia of his Dharma transmission and was just sitting there on the mountaintop and put them there out. And his pursuer had an enlightenment experience there. And what the advice was, avoid, beyond good and evil is the name of the koan. So go beyond good and evil. And of course, I've talked about this before. Many have talked about this before. You can only say so much about it, but you need to keep talking about it. So I want to examine it a little bit more closely. Partly also because today, as you well know, is the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And war is such a evil reality in itself, this complete destructiveness and cruelty, etc., and insanity and beyond. But I was reminded, precisely for that reason, of C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. I'm sure some of you, maybe most of you, are aware of this, written by C.S. Lewis in the early 40s, during the beginning of the Second World War itself. The subtitle, How a Senior Devil Instructs a Junior Devil in the Art of Temptation. I remember my parents telling me they read this on their honeymoon, so. The conceit, it's a literary conceit, is that an older devil is instructing, I think it's his nephew even, a younger devil in the art of temptation. It's a pretty conventional Catholic demonology, which is part of the problem. Our demonology is a little too literary, Dante and all of that. We haven't really, don't have a very sophisticated view. I've given a whole lecture on this on my course on angels, if you want to look it up on my website. But the reason I bring it up now is that one of the things that most impressed me when I first read it is at the beginning of the war, which is depicted here as well, Wormwood, who's the junior devil, says, "Oh wow, a war! Look at all this horrible, mayhem, which we're causing." And Screwtape, the senior devil, says, "Oh, wait a minute. Granted, there's all this, violence and cruelty, and it's a terrible thing for them, but don't forget that it's also the occasion of an incredible amount of heroism and selflessness. People looking to serve something beyond themselves, and not just country even. It's almost whatever, comradeship, ideals, whatever it might be." So it's an ambiguous, multivalent reality. He says it's not just evil, the occasion of good, which practically all evil can be or should be. Well, let's look at that again, at that quote from Shibayama that I mentioned last time on that koan. So he says, commenting on the koan, "When all dualistic opposition, such as good and evil, right and wrong, love and hatred, gain and loss, and the like, are completely transcended, and when one lives in the realm of the absolute, where even a thought of consciousness does not exist, then where are you? Where is the true self?" Which is what Huineng says, says to the general. At that moment where, it's the absolute self, where are you? what is beyond the good and evil. And it's the implication being that somehow you are, and you being the one with ultimate reality. So that's what he says. When you think neither good nor evil, Wei-Ning says, what is the true self at that moment? So now this is really difficult for a number of reasons. First of all, because this is not denying that there's good and evil. That the duality is a reality. It's not the ultimate reality. That's the point. But it's not false. It's not non-existent. There is good and evil, and sometimes people who are enlightened behave in such a way as if, there's no good and evil, so I can do what I want, and that's happened. So on its own level of consciousness, of duality, there is good and evil. But the whole point is to be able to go beyond that, as he's recommending here, that in the ultimate reality, it's beyond good and evil. But how? How is that achieved? Or how is that lived? Where's your true self? What is the true self that's able to include the good and the evil? One partial way to approach this is to realize that, of course, what we define of good and evil is very often very relative and very subjective. It's relative historically because some of the things we thought were good or not so good, like war. Some things we thought were evil were, maybe not so evil, like, lots of stuff. Usury, interracial marriage, demonizing gay people, lots of stuff which we thought was okay, or the people that were evil are not. So a lot of it has to do with human evolution of consciousness, even just on the social level. On the personal level, of course, you get cancer and you die. That's unevil, but it's not necessary. It's not evil. Natural things like that aren't even evil in themselves. There's nothing malicious or malevolent even about cancer. It's just natural. It's just something that happened. Nothing malevolent about an earthquake or a flood or a tsunami or another animal eating another animal. It's not malicious. It's just the way things are. As one person said once, it's an evil from a certain perspective, but it's not evil. So there's that analytical issue coming out. What are you calling evil, and why are you calling it evil? And of course, as St. Paul says, God makes everything work together for the good of those who love him. Whatever happens, and the Buddhists would say this too, whatever happens can be turned to good by the way you metabolize it. And I'll quote from Bernie Glassman in a moment about that. But in the broader scheme of things, ultimate reality, your absolute self that we're talking about, is that self of, what you discover it to be, both in Buddhism and Christianity and all the great traditions, is compassion, is love, embracing all somehow in that. Sister Elizabeth Johnson, for example, speaking about the Christian God in Christ being present to and with and in the suffering of all beings, all people, and even birds and animals and plants. That ultimate reality is that. It includes all that and is embracing it all in a compassion and in a share, which is a sharing in the suffering of. It's participation in that. It is that. All of that together, and it's included in something higher. In Buddhism, in Buddhist lore, you have hells and heavens, and neither of them are ultimate or permanent, because it all eventually goes back to the ultimate. And both early and more contemporary Christian theologians are saying the same thing. About hell, for example. So it's embraced in something higher. And I was also inspired, as I usually am, by the page-a-day calendar. In May 31st, Ma Tzu, who I'm not sure. It sounds like it could be Buddhist or even Taoist, the Chinese. But do not cling to good. And that's just one of the noble truths. You don't hold on to things because they seem good to you. You don't hold on to anything. You don't cling to anything because it's passing and it's part of something larger. But you don't cling to it as you don't cling to the good, or you don't reject the bad as you feel the bad, or however you assess the bad. You just the names. You're giving it names. Do not reject evil. Well, that's putting it pretty strongly. Do not reject evil. In the sense as you have to metabolize it, whether it's your own or somebody else's. You can't just push it away. As soon as you start pushing it away and creating scapegoats and creating projections, you're going to create more evil, if you want to talk about evil, by becoming, a judgmental kind of Pharisee, which there's so much of in religion. So that's the other danger of rejecting evil and projecting it outwards. You're thinking it's not you, or it doesn't involve you, or that you're better than it, whereas, what that leads to is the only thing Jesus criticized were the self-righteous ones. And then, in fact, that's the next line here. Purity and defilement. Well, we've been so mixed up and messed up about what purity is and what defilement is, and, that kind of standard, which is horribly, if not subjective, horribly dangerous, because then we create the pure and the impure, which is a danger in any religious tradition. So he concludes by saying, if you depend on neither good nor evil, purity, defilement, you will grasp the empty nature of sin. Sin is I wonder what the word is in Chinese. I mean, that's a very Western word. But you can see I think the point is you will grasp the empty nature of sin. Now remember what emptiness means from a Buddhist point of view. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It simply means that it has no ultimate substantial existence, which is true. It does not have an ultimate substantial existence. It's swallowed up into something more and transformed into something more, which is the absolute reality, which is nothing but love and compassion. So that's what we always have to realize, no matter what's going on. So that all the dualities are somehow resolved, in the ultimate. Even the myth of, and it is a myth as presented, the myth of the Garden of Eden, where everyone lived in perfect harmony before duality came in, and then don't eat of the fruit, again, don't participate in or create this, don't eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's really saying the same thing. As soon as you enter into the duality there, so it's not just about, as traditionally understood, about doing something evil, making an evil choice, or even deciding for yourself what's good and evil, which would be presumptuous. But it's basically saying as soon as you come down into duality and live in that, then you're going to start making mistakes and errors and, sin, So people like Carl Jung and modern spiritual writers are saying that the actual living in the realm of duality and being in not reconciling that duality, not denying that it's there on its own level, as I began by saying, but not reconciling it in something higher, that's the mess we're in. That's the original sin, if you will. It's almost identical with just being created once we plug into and identify with the dualities and start, Whereas if you go back to what, Wei-Ning was saying, right and wrong, love and hate, gain and loss, for example. What's gain and what's loss? As Jesus says, if you love your life, you'll lose it. If you lose it, you'll gain it. Light and dark, life and death are polarities which are a very good example of this. Some life is death and some death is life. Some light is darkness and some darkness is light. These things begin to be resolved on a higher level. It's easier to see with those examples than perhaps right and wrong, but it's the same basic point. And the great mystics, many in the West use a phrase which Jung also used in his own way. The coincidentia oppositorum is the mystical ideal, which is coming together of opposites. The coincidence of opposites. is a famous phrase in the mystical tradition, and that's what we're talking about. These dualities resolve themselves later in a higher way, which you can't intellectualize your way into, because it's not on that level. It's on the level of a higher synthesis, which only enlightenment or intuition or mysticism can understand and realize. Bernie Glassman, in his, Roshi Bernie Glassman, who passed away last year, his book, The Infinite Circle, that I've often recommended, has a number of reflections on this. And being a Jew, he knows what it's like to participate in a people who have horribly suffered. And yet he still, or therefore I would say, he still approaches it from a Zen point of view. For example, he quotes the sixth patriarch, Huineng, the one we're talking about right here. Quote, "To sit means to gain absolute freedom and to be mentally unperturbed in all outward circumstances, be they good or otherwise." Because all things work together for the good and resolved in something higher, And he quotes the Heart Sutra, which is this is partly a commentary on that. No end to suffering. There's no suffering, but no end to suffering. Because we still live in the realm of duality, but how we live it is the important thing. So he says, there's no escape from being hit on the head, having cancer, being in tremendous pain, or dying. We are enlightened and we have tremendous pain. We're enlightened and we die. Is there an end to children starving? To children being killed? No. And he quotes the example of a mother and a newborn child. When the child starts crying, the mother immediately picks up the child. There's no separation. Is there therefore no suffering? No. But in that one body state, that's a phrase he's often using here, one body, capital O, capital B, one body, one reality, the mother does not complain, she just responds. No separation does not mean no suffering, it means no complaining. And in fact, isn't much of what we mean by suffering nothing more than complaining? Or taking things personally or egocentrically. So in his compassionate work, his socially engaged Buddhism, Bernie is basically saying, and he says it many other places, you just respond to the situation with and in and as compassion, because that, as an enlightened being, is what you are. It doesn't mean that the suffering, etc., is not there, but it's embraced in something higher, and the response is spontaneous, like the mother and the baby, of pure compassion and pure response to whatever needs. I was thinking, I would say if you want to define evil in a way that makes any sense spiritually, say whatever diminishes life for anything or anyone. And the good is whatever enhances and expands life for anyone or anything. But be careful. Does cancer diminish life? If you approach it correctly, it enhances life. So you've got to be careful here, again, But still, I think that's a pretty good definition, insofar as any definition can be given of what evil or good are and how they function in the world. So compassion is always there to enhance life in the midst of suffering. Doesn't completely do away with it. And then one more quote from Bernie, which shows that if we do live in this one body as our absolute self, as Huineng was saying, what actually happens? Because this is one body, he says, trying to understand why any of us is doing anything implies we have to understand everything. We have to see how the flowers are affecting us, how people in sanitariums are affecting us, how a flood in China is affecting us. Therapy stresses the things that happen to us in our childhood, but karma is a lot broader than that. We're sharing everybody's fate because everybody is me. I and all things are enlightened at the same time, as he quotes the Buddha as saying. So he says, because this is one body, a single minute of zazen, of letting go, of clarity, affects the entire universe, all space and all time, past, present, and future. That's how important it is. So you can influence the whole universe for good, by being enlightened in that way, and you are one body affecting everything. That's how it all gets resolved. In and through you, who are it. And it can be for you personally, your own issues, or as he says, for the whole universe. In Christianity, that's the communion of saints, the mystical body. We're all connected. We all influence one another that way. If one member suffers, we all suffer, and it's all resolved in love. So those are a few reflections, of what beyond good and evil is and what it's not, and hopefully that can help us to be an influence for good in the deepest sense in our world.